What a week it's been for the Cubs. First, they trade their top prospect to get the most coveted starting pitcher that seemed to be available on the market, and the fireballer Edward Cabrera. And you hope that he changes the rotation. But then the second thing, even bigger, the Cubs go out in free agency and they get their guy. For the first time in a long time, you feel like the Cubs went out and spent the money on another coveted player, one of the most coveted players in free agency, and Alex Bregman. So here we are, building a roster that you feel a lot better about than you did a couple of days ago. And I think that's exciting. We're going to talk about that on the Cubs baseball channel. Hit AveD. That's our Web3 home. Giving away swag and prizes. We had a contest for the last couple Indiana football games. Who would have thought Indiana would be this good? I wouldn't. I didn't, but they're fun to watch. And we'll do it again for the college national championship. We should have done one for Bregman. Who would have known? All right. Like, subscribe, thumbs up, do all those things. Let's get this show started. Big one today. What do you say, everybody? Mick Gillespie, a very happy early bird Mick Gillespie, talking to you guys today after the Bregman announcement was made, right? Broken by the media that the Cubs had actually gone out and worked a deal for Alex Bregman. We got on the show here last night, and we basically, as soon as it was out, we jumped on here and talked about it. We've been covering this for a while. It's a 5-year, $175 million deal, and the Cubs get their guy, right? And we've talked about Bregman, what he brings to the table. I think the Cubs had to have him. I think he makes the lineup better. You look at the infield now, and it is a good infield. Michael Busch at first, coming into his own. I got a feeling that he's on the verge of becoming a star in the league. You got Nico Horner, who is as good as he's ever been. You got Dansby Swanson, who, might not be the most clutch hitter, but defensively is great, solid. And if you get a team where you don't have to rely on Swanson offensively, you get something out of him and you're happy. That's how you win. You saw the Braves do that for years. But now you got Alex Bregman, who was part of those Astros dynasties, went to the Red Sox last year, and help the Red Sox overachieve. I think this puts Matt Shaw in a position to be a super utility guy. Bregman can play a bunch of positions too. And I really love the fact that the Cubs ownership, Tom Ricketts, the Ricketts family, Jed Hoyer, are going out and saying that they're ready to try to compete again. A lot of you guys didn't think that was possible. They weren't going to be a player for Kyle Tucker and, 350, 450, somewhere in there, $1 million, right? So they get Bregman, and they get Bregman for the next 5 years. Is he going to be able to hold up for 5 years? I don't know. But when we talk about the near term, you got to like what the Cubs have done this offseason. And patience is part of this, but you could see it coming, because getting Edward Cabrera left money to be able to go out and do this. Last year, the Cubs were a team that was constantly trying to make this deal happen. They lost out to the Red Sox. and I've said it over and over again, I just think that the way that the Red Sox handled Rafael Devers, that whole thing, people are people. I know, and people will say money's this, money. Look, the guy could have got money in a lot of places, but you go through something like that, you got to trade a guy, who knows what was going on behind the scenes. If we find out about it, it's way worse behind the scenes than you ever think, right? Because, a lot of times you have problems, but they get squashed before we ever find out about it. But that wasn't the case with Devers, to the point where they had to trade him. He's one of the best players in baseball. So the Red Sox strike out twice. They have to trade Devers because they signed Bregman, and then Bregman opts out and then doesn't go back to them. What does this mean to the rest of the Cubs roster? I think that the Cubs need to go after a catcher. I'm just not sold on Carson Kelly and company long term. And I thought he had a great season last year. Maybe you have him and somebody else, but if you could get a star in that catcher's position, I was thinking like, what is Baltimore's Adley Rutschman? They have a couple guys that maybe they'd be willing to trade. They need a starting pitcher. The Cubs have like 7 of them now. Maybe you make some kind of deal to get this guy. But to me, that's the last spot on this roster where I'm looking at it and I'm going, this could be an area where the Cubs could again get better between now and spring training. This makes, for those of you guys going to Cubs convention, this is a pretty big deal. I mean, you got, 2 impact players with Cabrera and now Bregman coming your way. Now, the news has kind of gotten out that Edward Cabrera has some injury issues. What does that mean to the deal, right? That maybe he's got, some sort of small tear in his elbow. We know that he dealt with injuries the end of last year with the Marlins. Are you concerned at all about that deal? And if I was concerned, I would tell you, right? But the issue is this, is that pitching is a very painful thing, right? Like these guys are always hurt pitching, and sometimes it comes down to durability and who can basically work through pain. There's a guy who I've known for a long time in this game, and he does technology now for the Cubs, but he was a prospect pitcher with the Reds many moons ago, a guy by the name of Bobby Basham. Shout out Bobby. And I remember one time Bobby told me we had the same host family and in winter wood bat league baseball, not the same year, but the same family. And they loved him and great guy. But he told me later on when we kind of hooked up in the minor leagues, he said, pitching's painful. And he's right. Like it is painful. It's tough to go out there and throw that ball over and over and over again. And as simple as that is, you just something that pitchers have to deal with. Right. So I look at this and I go, okay, I like where the Cubs are. I think that Cabrera is someone that they're probably going to have to nurture and push along. But the Yankees were willing to make the deal. The Mets were willing to make the deal. He was the best that's out there. He's a high leverage arm. The Cubs did not have a guy like him. And you hope that whether it comes to, hey, and this is right away in the pitch lab, we're hearing maybe he was tipping his pitches and immediately the Cubs are picking up on it. This is where they're extremely good. And they separate themselves from a lot of organizations when it comes to what they're able to do in their pitch lab and then take that to the field, right? So if they're able to do that with this guy, think about his ability. Going to have to pitch through pain. Hey, we noticed that you're tipping pitches. You've got all the stuff throwing 100 miles an hour with your 90 mile an hour plus change up and you're basically your knockout slider and all the stuff that you bring to the table. Immediately a couple tweaks away from being an ace at the top of the rotation. You gave up a huge haul to get him. Second straight year, though, that the Cubs have said, we feel like we need to do that to be able to put a team on the field that can contend, right? And it's got to figure out how to beat the Brewers. That's the first thing. And don't forget about Cincinnati, by the way. They made the playoffs last year. They have a really good team. But, them and the Cubs and the Brewers, I think are going to be contending for the division. And then, who's going to beat the Dodgers? And that's what this all comes down to. But with this infield, not only offensively is this infield good, I think defensively, this infield is elite. And that's where the Cubs were anyway. Bregman only makes them better. And I love the idea of having Shaw as a guy who you can move around. Shaw can play shortstop. He can play second. He can play third. He's, to me, potentially a better batter than Dansby Swanson down the line. He's got more power than Nico Horner. So as a manager, if you're Craig Counsell, not only did you just get Bregman, but it also moved that need for a Willie Castro type who the Cubs traded last year to get at the deadline with Matt Shaw. So exciting stuff. What does this mean for the market? Well, if you're one of these other teams out there that is looking for help offensively, the Mets are going to end up probably with one of the guys remaining, Cody Bellinger, Kyle Tucker, or Bo Bichette, right? I never felt like Bo Bichette was a fit for the Cubs, but he's a good player. Would love to have him. Just this is the spot that they needed, third base, and they're getting him for Bregman for less money than Bichette's going to get. And then I just don't think, like I said, Tucker was going to match because of the money. But what does this put him? Because I said this feeling that maybe Tucker's you're not hearing his name. Teams are a little hesitant with potential work stoppage coming up next year to go and spend that kind of money. Well, if you're the Yankees, I think you're right now going, okay, we need to either get Cody Bellinger or we need to ramp it up and get Kyle Tucker. I could see the Yankees making a move here soon to knock that out. And then you're talking about Bichette. Is he going to go back to the Blue Jays, or are they going to get Tucker? Are they using each other as leverage? Who knows? But I look for the Mets, the Yankees, and the Giants to be aggressive here. And don't be surprised if the Dodgers don't pull another one out if they get the right price on one of these guys. But the Cubs, now it's like, what are you going to do? Do you trade someone with, like a Jameson Tyone who to loosen up some money? Do you make a deal to get a star catcher for this team? Or are you happy with where you're at right now, just kind of looking around and maybe adding some pieces to the bullpen? And that's what we'll be keeping an eye on. But anyway, look, great to have you guys here. Obviously, we're all fired up. QR code right there, AveD, be a part of what we do. And, we'll throw some swag out there for you. But have a great day. This is what it's all about. This is why you watch every day. Because for weeks, we've been covering this. For weeks, some of you guys have been in the comment section. They're never going to do anything, Mick. Why don't you talk about... Look, I told you the day before they made the Cabrera trade, go back and watch the show. Said, don't be surprised if they don't make this deal. All week after the deal, you look at the money and you're like, there's just a great connection between the Cubs and Bregman. Got it done. And we'll keep an eye on what the next thing is. But anyway, have a fantastic day and go Cubs.